RBC 15. We got our first rumor yesterday. We know where it is. That's what we know right now. We know exactly where the fight is. It is going to be in Wembley. It's going to be amazing. So it's the main event. That's what you all want to ask, right? We were given a tweet today, and we were given 5 possibilities. 4 pictures, 5 possibilities. It was the quadrilogy between Cesaro and Rashad, Bogatti King, Divine Jones Jr., Jones Jr. Jones 3, or Divine Brooke. Those are 5 possibilities that could totally happen. My job isn't to say what I believe should happen. I'm predicting and I am analyzing each option. Number 1. The main event, which sounds most obvious, but maybe the one that people don't want. That's Cesaro Rashad 4. This basically gives us confirmation that if Cesaro is going to be on this card, that's the fight to make. Alright, yeah, that's pretty much what we're all thinking. Cesaro Rashad, I mean, that's the one that Raymundo's wanted to make. That's basically the biggest rivalry we've ever had in the sport, competitive-wise. Cesaro's the greatest of all time. The reason people don't like this fight, which is something I disagree with a lot, is Khalid Rashad. The only reason he's getting this fight is because, well, his past few fights haven't been decisive, but he's cleaning out everyone else. Who else is going to fight for the title except for the man on the winning streak? Khalid Rashad, who beat Dax, who beat Casper, who beat Drew, albeit very close, but they beat them all. So who else is in for the fight? Well, you're right on one thing. What you're wrong in is the fact that there's a reason he cleared out those guys. Those guys are pretty good. Casper DeVries is a damn good fighter. He dominated Vet Davis. Dax is still a tough opponent, and he washed him in 4 rounds, or 3 rounds, I don't know. And then he beat Drew Garcia in a tough, but it's an important fight for him to have. And who knows? If he shocks the world, is it one of the biggest upsets of all time? Maybe. I mean, we never know. There's been some upsets before. I don't know if it's that big of an upset. I think Cesaro's going to close out as a huge overdog. Probably 3-1, 4-1 maybe. It could be 3-1 in my opinion. Yeah, 3-1 sounds right. Let me tell you this. It's much closer. I think Khalid has a legitimate chance. But he's going to have to throw everything he's ever known out the window, and he's going to have to fight Cesaro differently. What I mean by that, lately he has been fighting like a guy who is... he's analyzing. All 3 of his fights he's had, well, except for the Casper fight, where he started off a little bit slow and he picked up the pace. Maybe he did in the Casper fight, I'm not fully sure. But that's my point. Maybe that's what he needs, maybe he needs to go more aggressive against Cesaro. Anyway, what would this mean? Well, you can have basically all the other fights you want to. You can have Bogatti versus King, Divine versus Jones Jr., Jones Jr. versus Jones 3, or Divine versus Rebel Brooke. You can definitely have the Bogatti fight. The thing is, this fight does trump over every one of them by default because the man's name is Cesaro and the man's name is Khalid Rashad, and they're arguably the biggest names in the sport, and the winner of this fight is going to be #1 pound for pound. We know that for a fact. Every Cesaro fight means something. It's the 4th fight. If you have the number 4 attached to it, what are you going to justify having in front of it? Alright, maybe heavyweight, but nothing else trumps this. This is for the undisputed RBC welterweight championship. Nothing else matters. Ring Magazine, RBC, WBA, IBF, everything's on the line. I can't justify anything else above that except the fact that don't have this fight so you can have Ozzy versus NJJ's the main event. But that's where we're at, guys. This is it. Khalid Rashad versus Cesaro is I'm going to have to say it's the biggest fight of all time because it's going to give us closure. No matter how this fight goes, it's going to end with someone winning and walking out there unless this plane doesn't happen. But that's really where we're at this point. Now, let's get to the interesting one. Bogatti versus King. Stylistically, this is the best fight. I mean, let me tell you something. The older fans, they're gonna love this match. This harkens back to the old days of Tams King being so dominant. His rivalry with Gabriel Maldonado, how that's never finished. And Bo Gotti is here, and he has been so dominant. And the doubters say, well, he's never been tested before. Again, and they try to justify saying, well, he never beat Cortez Fury. He he beat Cortez Fury in a weird way that people don't appreciate. That he beat Gabriel Maldonado in a way that people don't appreciate. I mean, you gotta give the guy some credit. He's the best heavyweight of all time, and when he fights Tams King, that's gonna be on the line. But give the guy some credit. He is top 2 pound for pound right now for a reason. He put Maldonado on that ring and destroyed him. He knocked out Gavidas in 1 round, which you're telling me put some respect in the guy's name. Well, yeah. Just remember, that dude got knocked out in 1 round. I respect Gavidas, but man, he did not belong in the same ring as Bugatti. I respect him a lot, but Bugatti's just on another level. That being said, Tams King is also on another level. Tams King might close out as the favorite, which may surprise some people. If it's the main event, where do you look at this? You can make this the biggest fight of all time. It takes some hype work, and it takes the hyping up. But if you want this to be the biggest one, we've got to make sure that we realize Bugatti is a beast. And he is the guy. He needs to be the favorite going into this one if you want this as the main event. How the fight goes, it's going to end very, very quickly. It's not going past 5 rounds. Someone's getting knocked out. And both guys are huge power punchers. Tams King's a little bit bigger, but Bugatti's got hands like a madman. He smothers you. He wants to end the fight quickly. He wants to get out of there, collect a paycheck. He is very, very feel all the time. That's what we got. Let's go to next. And this is the one I wanted as the main event, but I don't think I'm getting it. Ozzy Divine, Notorious Jones Jr. Middleweight's my favorite division. Not just because of how stacked it is, but because all my favorite fighters are there. Ozzy and NJJ may be top 5 of my favorite fighters, just because I share the commentary desk with Ozzy Divine, and the fact that NJJ is the most exciting fighter in the game, not named Harry Golovkin. Anyway, NJJ and Jam Jones had the greatest fight. I take back that Harry thing. NJJ is the most exciting fighter. NJJ and Jam Jones had the best fight I've ever called in RBC. Ever. Nothing comes close. I mean, you can give me some fights like him versus Jam Jones 1. You can give me an argument of the, what's it called? Khalid versus Cruzaro fight. Give me an argument. But don't tell me that was not the best fight ever. 12 rounds of pure excitement for 36 minutes. Out of all the odds, out of all the scuff damage, it happened, and it was the best part of the night, and this is why this should be the main event. Both these guys at the end of the day steal the show. RBC 10, RBC 14, I wasn't talking about the main event, well, everyone was, but I was talking about how damn good this fight was. When we talk about an Ozzy Divine event, I talk about, dude, that guy destroyed him in 2 rounds. I mean, what are we doing here? This guy is the best. He's the best middleweight on the world, and both guys have a lot to prove. Ozzy needs to prove that his schedule, his strength of opponent is good. He needs to prove that weakness of schedule was not a thing. That he is legit. This is the toughest opponent he's going to face. We all know that. And all Notorious needs to prove is he can beat Ozzy. Because Ozzy has just dominated guys. It's very simple. The fight's very simple. Ozzy's a knockout artist. Notorious Jones Jr. is a guy who will smother you with that freaking jab of his and then connect with the hook. Game plan. Let's get to the second Notorious outcome, which could be another one of my favorite fights. NJJ Jam 3 will deliver. There's no doubt about that. It might be better than the second fight. It's going to be better than the first fight. Jam Jones is legit, and we need to realize that. He does not need the fight. anyone other than Notorious Jr. to justify that title rematch. Maybe he will if Notorious comes undisputed, but Jay doesn't really need to prove anything anymore. Dude was IBF champion for a long time, and he almost beat Notorious. He was very, very close. He fought a very good fight. However, at the end of the day, he couldn't keep up that 5-round streak that he had. But it was a great fight. And here we go. Let's talk about this fight for a second. How do we make this one the main event? Well, it's very, very simple. You basically say this is not the biggest fight card of all time. At the end of the day, I mean, it's Cruzaro Rashad is going to make this the biggest fight card of all time, except for maybe the other two I mentioned. Jones Jr. versus Jones 3 will not take priority over the fourth fight. Even though it's a trilogy, even though the winner is the best, it's not going to take priority over undisputed welterweight gold. One belt, the second best belt in the RBC, will not take priority. And let's get into this fifth one. I like this fight a lot. I think maybe it needs to happen on RBC 15. It's not the main event. The main event is not going to be Ozzy Divine versus Rebel Brook. Raimundo knows better. Okay, it's just not happening. But it's interesting to think about. I mean, I would like to see that fight happen. But it's not the main event, okay? Let's not kid ourselves here. But anyway, that's really what we have in front of us. Real question is, what do you want as the main event? Who do you want to see? People will say name value. Cruzaro is the biggest draw in the game. People are going to come out to see him. If you're the heavyweight fan, you want to see the heavyweights. You want to see who's the best heavyweight ever. If you are a fan of classic fights, a fight that's going to be fight of the night, you're going to show for Divine versus Notorious, or Notorious versus Jam. And if you're a Rebel Brook fan of the old and you want to see these two guys who never faced each other before collide, you want to see Rebel Brook versus Ozzy Divine, which is not going to be the main event. It is not going to be the main event, guys. Because Jones Jr. is going to say, well, you ducked me for so long. It's fun. It's very, very fun. And there's a possibility that we could see 3 of these fights in one night. Actually, it's almost pretty much a guarantee. We could see 4 of these fights potentially, depending on how it goes. I can tell you right now, I don't know anything. Remember, I don't know anything, okay? I can tell you that right now. I can almost guarantee Cruzaro versus Rashad 4 will be the main event. Almost. I can guarantee you, certainly, that Bugatti and King will be on that card. And I can guarantee you almost that either Ozzy Divine or Notorious Jr. will be on that card. I think both. So we could see either 3 of the fights or 4 of the fights. If you want to call this the biggest card of all time, that's where it has to be. And that's where I leave you guys. So the question I have for you is, what do you want to see? What are you most interested in? Are you excited? And what is the main event? What should be the main event? Because we're probably going to get the answer tomorrow.